Basically, I was finishing up my undergrad and I did a thesis that made me interested in Montana's political and cultural history. While I was doing this thesis, I learned sort of what I would say is the true history of Montana. If you guys live here and love the state and love this place, you've probably heard things like Lewis and Clark camped at the base of the Rattlesnake right there as they were making their way through the region. They had quite a terrible winter trying to get up by Lolo Pass. They got turned around a few times. You hear these like triumphant narratives of early explorers, early settlers. They're very victorious. There seems like things that bind the way that we understand each other together. But what you won't hear of so often, and once you start scratching the veneer of Montana history, what you'll learn about more and more, is you'll learn about histories of how the land was actually settled, how it was allotted, how the Salish Kootenai were pushed up toward the Flathead, how President Garfield was made to sign a treaty with a number of tribal leaders out by Council Bluffs, and the interpretation was terrible. There was sort of the pressure, the use of force and violence in order to achieve political aims. And then ultimately, the chiefs that signed away the original lands of the Salish and Kootenai left an X at the bottom of the treaty, an X that still stands in historical record today as a legitimate tribal signature. So once I learned about these things, I realized there's a lot more in this community's history to reckon for than I had initially bargained for. I moved here and I thought that I liked the mountains a lot, and once you start paying attention, there's a lot of things going on. You'd be surprised. And so when you look at the history of racial groups in Montana, you see this sort of hierarchical relationship, and the Chinese were no different. Just yesterday, I was driving from Butte over to Missoula, and as you're passing the interstate, you're seeing on the left side what remains of an old railroad that used to be there moving cargo through, and you see a number of tunnels that have been bored through the rock. And those tunnels were very likely bored through by the explosions that were tended by Chinese railroad workers, who often got the most difficult jobs in high mountain passes. If you go over to the Missoula City Cemetery out there, there is a plot, it's one of the most unique grave sites in the area, I'd say, of about 22 Japanese railroad workers who in the winter of 1912, they were out by Plains, Montana building the railroad, and they actually froze to death. And you have in the early 2000s the Japanese ambassador to the United States visiting with the Mansfield Center, going over to the grave, and her reaction was, these boys were far from home and they must have been so cold. And so you hear these sorts of things and you realize, it's not just Lewis and Clark that made this place. There's a number of people of all different backgrounds. We think of Montana today as a not very ethnically or culturally diverse place, but that is not the history of Montana. This used to be a crossroads of people from all different cultures. And, there were things like lynchings and there were disagreements and legislation passed. But what I'm struck by more when I read about the history of Montana is this incredible history of collaboration. There are people of all different backgrounds coming together to live what are difficult lives out here, and to build a society and to educate the next generation, bring up people who are civically minded, these sorts of things.